When people talk about Pokemon games, there's usually a very clear hierarchy in everyone's mind. You've got the mainline RPGs, then you've got the beloved spin-offs like Pokemon Snap, Mystery Dungeon, and in my eyes the Pokemon Ranger series. And more obviously. And then you've got the other ones, the weird ones, the awkward experiments, the titles that exist because someone at Nintendo needed something, well, anything, with Pikachu on the box. And today we're talking about one of the strangest of these Pokemon spin-offs, and that is Pokémon Dash. Welcome to the Worst Racing Games, the internet series where you guys suggest different racing games that you think are terrible, then I play them, review them, and rank them. So last week we played Nicktoons Racing on the original PlayStation, and for the first time in a while we're moving away from the PlayStation this week towards the Nintendo DS for Pokémon Dash. Released in 2005 as one of the earliest Nintendo DS titles, Pokémon Dash wasn't just a spin-off, it was a statement. Not necessarily a good one, but a statement nonetheless. It was Nintendo basically saying, hey, look what this new touchscreen can do, look how innovative we are, and look, Pikachu is running again. Now after 20 or so years, to me, Pokémon Dash is something of a punchline. I would put it up there with games like Pokémon Channel and Hey You Pikachu, titles remembered less for how fun they were and more for how weird and awkward they were instead. But here's the thing, Pokémon Dash isn't actually unplayable, it's not broken, it's not even completely without merit, it's just deeply limited, oddly designed and painfully emblematic of early DS growing pains. So let's go back, let's dust off our stylus, stretch our wrists and take a long, honest look at Pokémon Dash. What it tried to be, what it actually was, and why it still feels like one of Nintendo's most blatant early cash-ins. To understand Pokémon Dash, you first have to understand the Pokémon spin-off landscape. Spin-offs have always been a gamble. On one end of the spectrum you have genuinely great games. Pokémon Pinball, which somehow turned RNG and reflex-based gameplay into something incredibly addicting. Pokémon Puzzle League honestly had no right being as good as it was, and Pokémon Snap was a game so beloved that fans begged for a sequel for over 2 decades before it finally arrived. But on the other end of the spectrum we've got the entire Pokémon Rumble series, and Pokémon Channel, which is just a glorified waiting simulator disguised as interactivity. Pokémon Dash kinda falls more into that second category, but with an important caveat. Unlike Channel, Dash actually works, it responds and functions exactly as designed. The problem is that the design itself is kinda what holds it back. Now before we go any further, if you're a fan of racing games, not so great racing games, or Pokemon, then why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. And whilst you're at it, if you're a big fan of the Worst Racing Games series and want to support the channel any further, then why not check out my Patreon using the link in the description below. Over on my Patreon you can get access to cool stuff like early access to videos and your name in the credits of every single upload. And for the holiday season there's 30% off using the code in the pinned comment below. Anyway, that's enough selling myself to you, let's get back to some Dash. So Pokémon Dash was developed by Umbrella, the same devs who brought us Hey You Pikachu and Pokémon Channel and would go on to give us the Pokémon Rumble series. So basically they've developed every single divisive spin-off in the series. Near enough. So Pokémon Dash launched during the very beginning of the Nintendo DS lifecycle, when developers were still figuring out what the system was even really for. Touchscreen controls weren't standardized, dual screen design was experimental, and everyone was just throwing ideas at the wall. And Pokémon Dash was one of the earliest examples of that. This wasn't a racing game because Pokémon needed a racer, it was a racing game because Nintendo kinda needed proof of concept. On paper, Pokémon Dash sounds simple enough. It's a top-down racing game where players control Pikachu as he runs through a series of courses, hitting checkpoints in a specific order before reaching the finish line. The twist? Those checkpoints aren't linear. Instead of a traditional track, Pokémon Dash gives you an open map and says, well, figure it out. Some checkpoints are close, others are across rivers, forests, cliffs, or basically just unreachable terrain. And the game expects you to plan a route, often mid-race, while competing against AI opponents who, of course, know the map by heart, or well, by code. It's a genuinely interesting idea, a non-linear racer where navigation matters as much as speed, but unfortunately that's where things do start to get a bit messy. So let's talk about how you actually control Pikachu. There are no buttons for movement, no D-pad steering, and no analog stick. Instead, you drag the stylus across the touchscreen in the direction you want Pikachu to run. In theory, this turns the DS into a kind of analog control surface. In practice, it turns your hand and kind of the screen into a victim. At first, it was kind of novel. Oh wow, Pikachu runs where I drag. That's kind of neat. Then about 10 minutes later, reality sets in. You are constantly rubbing the stylus across the screen. Up, down, left, right, over and over, every race, every second. And here's the kicker, dragging faster doesn't make Pikachu go faster. No matter how fast you aggressively scribble, Pikachu's speed caps out at, well, a leisurely jog. So all that frantic motion does nothing except tire your wrist. It's not engaging, it's not expressive, it's just kind of repetitive, and when your entire game is built around this single control gimmick, that repetition becomes exhausting very quickly. And I can tell you, emulating this game ain't exactly much fun either, because you're just dragging your cursor across the same small part of the screen over and over again. One of Pokémon Dash's most interesting ideas is also one of its most frustrating. Instead of racing from point A to point B, players must hit checkpoints in a specific order, and these are often scattered all over the map. The game tells you which checkpoint is next, what it doesn't do is tell you how exactly you get there. On the ground, you're given a bare-bones radar on the top screen. That's it, no full map, no route guidance, just vague directional hints. The only way to see the entire course clearly is by hopping into a hot air balloon, like Team Rocket. The balloon is Pokémon Dash's most defining mechanic. At various points in the course, Pikachu can hop into a balloon and float into the air, giving the player a full overhead view of the environment. This sounds helpful, and it is, but there is a catch. While in the balloon, you can't move freely, you drift slowly by swiping the screen, so you're not really moving that fast. The balloon essentially pauses your momentum in exchange for information. This does create an interesting risk-reward dynamic where do you sacrifice time to learn the layout or do you just wing it and hope for the best? The problem is that the game leans too hard into this restriction. Most checkpoints are deliberately placed in ways that require balloon scouting, and because you don't retain a persistent map, you're constantly forced to reorient yourself. The result means more studying and less racing, and in a game called Pokémon Dash, that's a bit of a strange feeling. Now, for the first half of the game, Pokémon Dash is almost laughably easy. The initial set of 25 races can be cleared with minimal effort. The AI is fairly forgiving, the maps are quite simple, and you can brute force most of the races without fully understanding the somewhat simple mechanics. And then, you unlock more and suddenly the gloves come off. The AI racers know all the optimal routes, move at maximum speed, don't hesitate, of course never get lost. Meanwhile, you're juggling two screens, stylus movement, radar interpretation, balloon scouting, and terrain hazards. It doesn't feel challenging in a fun way, it just kind of feels unfair. The game doesn't evolve its mechanics, it just expects mastery without ever truly teaching it. And despite the name Pokémon Dash, this game might as well be called Pikachu Dash, because that's all you get. One character, one moveset, one experience. You race against Pokemon like Meowth and Torchic, but you can never play as them. Even in multiplayer, every player would be Pikachu. This is one of the game's most baffling decisions. I mean, Pokemon spin-offs live and die on variety. But what's more baffling is it's not like there weren't other Pokemon to choose from at this point. I mean, sure, we were still only in Gen 3, but there was like 300 and something Pokemon you could have put in this game. Different Pokemon with different abilities could have added strategic depth, offset control limitations, and maybe even made multiplayer genuinely interesting. Instead, everyone runs the same race, the same way, and the same every time. For a franchise built on choice, Pokémon Dash offers basically none. Now, even by early Nintendo DS standards, in my opinion, Pokémon Dash is not very pretty. Of course, as it's top down, the environments are all flattened, but it gives like a SNES era look, and if you zoom in, or even out, textures become muddy or pixelated. Pikachu himself is rendered in 3D and looks fine, clearly lifted from earlier Pokémon demos, but he feels visually disconnected from the world around him. Animations are stiff, the run cycles lack fluidity, and overall, the presentation feels much more like a tech demo than an actual polished full-released game. I mean, yeah, sure, it was an early release, but even then, other games were already doing better. Despite all of this, Pokémon Dash isn't completely devoid of good ideas. Certain checkpoints require specific power-ups to access, and some terrain types are hazardous unless you plan ahead. Descending from balloons introduces a surprisingly nuanced risk system where landing angle and speed matter. There is strategy here, it's just buried underneath layers of awkward execution. But when everything clicks, and you've memorized a course, planned a route, and executed it cleanly, the game almost feels good. Emphasis on the almost. Something else I really like about Pokémon Dash is its Game Boy Advance cartridge integration. By inserting a Pokémon GBA game into the bottom of your DS, it could read the save file and create special courses based on the Pokémon in your party. Higher level Pokémon give you more time to complete these challenges, turning your old team into a new gameplay mode. It's a clever concept, which obviously probably didn't get used very much, but still a cool inclusion nonetheless that they didn't have to do. Now, how did Pokémon Dash hold up in terms of its critical response? Well, unfortunately the game holds a generally unfavourable critic score of 46 out of 100 on Metacritic, and an almost just as unfavourable user score with 4.7 out of 10. Now, the game would still sell pretty decently with 750,000 copies shifted worldwide, which isn't terrible, but for a Pokemon game obviously isn't that high. Now, something else I find really interesting when making these videos is to see how much the games that we're playing are valued today in today's, frankly, kind of ridiculous pre-owned market. So, just for a cartridge of Pokémon Dash without the box, it's about £15, which is what I probably would have expected. But for a complete box, you're looking for 40 quid, 40 Great British pounds, for objectively the worst Pokémon spin-off game ever made. I don't really know what I was expecting because that's just classic Pokémon to have the prices just inflate. What's more interesting is looking at the charts showing its evolution of the pricing, and I have to wonder what the hell happened at the end of 2020 into 2021 for the price to suddenly jump from about £15 all the way up to 40. I know prices went up a lot during lockdown, so I'm guessing it probably has something to do with that, but this was actually after lockdown had ended, so... Anyway, moving on. So now the time has come where we have to rank Pokémon Dash on our worst racing games tier list. Now, to be honest, we've actually had a few good games recently, so it's nice to have something that is genuinely not that good again. Pokémon Dash for me is going to sit firmly in the middle tier of being rubbish. It's just not a well-designed game. It has some charm to it, there are some neat ideas to be found, but it's just clunky, it's awkward to control, and honestly, it's aged like old milk. At the end of the day, Pokémon Dash exists basically for one reason: to put Pikachu on the Nintendo DS as fast as possible. And it shows. It's not terrible, it's not broken, but it is shallow, repetitive, and painfully restrictive. There's a solid foundation here with interesting ideas, but it's all buried underneath poor decisions, and the game never quite rises above its limitations. Pokémon Dash might not be the worst Pokémon game ever made, but it's one of the most transparent cash-ins Nintendo's ever released. And so that takes us to the end of our look at Pokémon Dash for the Nintendo DS, and with it, this week's episode of Worst Racing Games. So let me know in the comments down below what you think of Pokémon Dash. Do you like it? Did you play it when you were a kid? And would you have ranked it any differently? And as always, if you have a suggestion for a game to be played on this series, let me know as well. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap the bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is thanks, and bye bye.